This is
Ah.
TikTok by Bloomberg. If you're just joining us, we're just a few minutes away from the close. As you can see, stocks rallying into the close. Joining us now to break it all down is Bloomberg's Julie Hyman. So, Jules, where do we stand with the major averages?
So it looks like we're actually going to close near the highs, or if not at the highs of the session for the major averages. The Dow right now is up 691 points. That's a gain of 2.9%. 24,225 is where it is right now. The S&P 500 up about 2.8% at 2660. The Nasdaq up 3.3% at 7220. So just incredible gains today, the likes of which we have not seen since August 26th. 2015. So it's been quite a while, and it's only been about 3 times, even over the past 2 years, that we've seen a gain of at least 1% or 2%, I should say, each for the major averages. So it's a pretty unusual move.
And if you recall, August 2015, there were some pretty big market moves that summer, if I recall, right, Jules?
Yeah, I think at that point in time, we were in the aftermath of Brexit vote. Am I remembering correctly? Hopefully so. Anyway, it's yeah, I mean, it's just unusual to see these kinds of market gyrations, and over the past year, there's been no activity at all.
So, Jules, we saw 2 days of really big moves to the downside last Thursday and Friday off of the news of tariffs, and so what's behind the change today? What's behind the big rally today?
I mean, on Friday and late last week, the declines that we were seeing, yes, had something to do with concerns about tariffs and a potential trade war. There are also some gyrations in the credit markets that some investors have been watching and have been saying that was perhaps contributing to the selling in stocks. Today, it seems like the main catalyst were some commentary from members of the administration, including Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, indicating some optimism that we could avert a trade war, perhaps even avert the tariffs entirely, and that negotiations with China were moving forward. Now, is that really enough to cause gains of nearly 3% or more than 3% on the major averages? That's not entirely clear. There might be some sort of technical aspects in effect as well, with the S&P closing Friday very close to the 200-day moving average, so you might be having a bounce off of that level and some technical buying following the technical selling. So I think it would be an oversimplification to say that people aren't worried about a trade war anymore, and that's the reason that we're seeing gains today. But certainly it has been a contributing factor.
And, in terms of other political news, today we had the news about the U.S. and its allies expelling Russian envoys for the attack in the U.K. It seems like markets are somehow shrugging that off.
They do seem to be shrugging that off. And largely we have not seen market reaction to rhetoric between the U.S. and Russia in particular. In general, we have not seen that much reaction to political events in the markets. It's been sort of the exception rather than the rule. We had the tax legislation, markets reacted to that. We have sometimes had headlines regarding Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller affecting the markets, but it hasn't happened that frequently. I will say there is an ETF that tracks Russia. RSX is the ticker. It's the VanEck Vectors Russia ETF. That fell about 0.1% on the day. So it's not a big decline, but it is notable considering the fact that we generally saw stocks rallying, although stocks didn't rally in Europe. That's something else we should mention. But it is notable that Russia fell.
And if you're just joining us, we're just about 30 seconds till the close of the session in New York. And joining us now to break it all down is Bloomberg's Julie Hyman. So, Jules, with just under a minute left, let's talk about a few movers. Microsoft, one of the big movers today. Tell us what's going on there.
Yeah, in fact, Microsoft, the biggest up mover in the S&P 500 on the day, rising about 7.5%. And we're listening to that closing bell there, as indeed we're seeing stocks close near highs of the session. Microsoft up 7.5%, the best performer in the S&P, and Microsoft also contributing quite a bit to the gains overall in the S&P 500 today because of its size. So Microsoft up the most since October of 2015. There's an analyst who came out today with a price target on the stock of $130 a share, an analyst from Morgan Stanley. And the stock's right now closing today at around 93.78, so pretty big upside, and that's also the highest estimate from a Wall Street analyst for Microsoft shares. The same analyst said that basically we could see $1 trillion in market cap for Microsoft at some point. Right now, it's around, $670 billion or so. So pretty provocative note there, and interesting that it did cause such a rally in those Microsoft shares.
And Jules, as you were speaking, we heard the closing bell, as you mentioned, and you saw that redhead, the Dow closing for seeing its best day since August 2015. Just bring us back to the major averages. Where do we stand at the close right now?
Yeah, that's true of all three major averages. Best single session since August of 2015. That's on a percentage basis. So that Dow gain of 670 points is good for a gain of 2.9%. So the Dow closing the day 24,203. The S&P up 2.7%. 2,658, and the Nasdaq up 3.3%. 72.20 is where it finished the session. And by the way, that Nasdaq outperformance, gaining more than the other major averages, speaks to the fact that technology really helped lead the gains today. It wasn't just Microsoft. It was technology pretty broadly that was leading during the session, along with financials. And that's no accident. Those are the two groups that did the worst last week on concerns over tariffs, on concerns over a flattening yield curve. And so those two groups really roaring back during the day. But it was also a pretty broad-based gain. Certainly the gains weren't limited to those two groups. All of the groups, all the sectors in the S&P 500 rose. Only 20 stocks fell in the S&P on the session as I look at the closing numbers here. But a lot of tech heavyweights gaining: Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Intel, and then the big banks, Bank of America, JP Morgan, Berkshire Hathaway, not a bank but a financial company, all of them rising on the day.
And Jules, a nice segue as you talk about tech stocks. Let's talk about the one that we've been talking about, I feel like, all week, Facebook. So it looks like it ended the day just slightly a touch higher.
Slightly in the green,
yeah.
But what's amazing about Facebook finishing higher today is that it resisted doing so all session long. It was only in the last 20, 30 minutes of trading that Facebook finally rose. It was really bucking the uptrend today. For most of the day, it was still falling. So it's interesting that finally at day's end, some of the buying finally spread to Facebook as well. We got confirmation today from the Federal Trade Commission that it had indeed opened a non-public probe into Facebook's privacy practices. This is something that Bloomberg had reported last week, but the FTC does not always confirm these sorts of things, but they did indeed do that today. And the stock fell as much as 6.5% on the day before squeaking out that gain, which was only 67 cents, or about a 0.4%. So finishing the day just over $160 a share.
And if you're just joining us on TikTok by Bloomberg, we're just wrapping up today's market action with Bloomberg's Julie Hyman. So, Jules, last question. It's only Monday. It's only Monday. Anything else that you're watching the rest of the week that investors should be paying attention to?
I think, of course, for the rest of the week, we're going to have to look for any more commentary from the administration and administration officials, as well as from China, on any kind of pace of negotiations, if indeed they're happening, what are the details. Economic data-wise this week, it's not a terribly busy week, but we will get the Fed's preferred inflation gauge. It's something called personal consumption expenditures, which is just a fancy way of saying this is one way to look at inflation that the Fed likes. That's on the 29th. Markets are closed on Friday for Good Friday, so that's something to keep in mind. Will we see kind of unusual trading trends this week because it is a holiday-shortened week? That's something to keep in mind as well.
Julie Hyman, thank you so much as always. That was Bloomberg's Julie Hyman wrapping up today's action in the markets. You can follow her on Twitter at Jules Hyman. Get all your updates on TikTok by Bloomberg. Stay tuned for more.